All right, boys and girls of all ages over 18, of course, welcome to the show. Today, as I'm sure you're all aware, the name of the game is a debrief, where myself and the indomitable Phil Escott will be debriefing a discussion that Phil had very recently with an academic name of Dan Wilson. And I'll give my thoughts. I'll do the heavy lifting today, mostly because Phil asked that I do so. So we'll hear from Phil when he wants to be heard. But in the meantime, I have a loose outline of what I want to lay out in terms of what I saw. I have a bunch of resources to share with you. We'll try and keep an eye on the chat as best as we can as well, but we won't be doing as much interacting with you in the chat today as normal. For that reason, there's a lot being juggled, a lot going on. Hopefully it all goes well. Anything that goes wrong, I apologize for in advance. This is quite a technical challenge, but I'm sure we can handle it. Anyway, Phil, darling, how are you?
Bart, I'm great. And thank you so much for having me back on. It's been too long since we chatted, and this one will be fun, eh?
Yeah. I've enjoyed putting this together. Now, to clarify, this was a 2.5 hour discussion that you had with Dan. We're not going to get through all of that today, not by a long chalk. We're not going to deal with all of Dan's arguments today. What I have done for preparation for today is I have focused on the first 40 minutes or so, and we'll deal with Dan's first 3 substantive arguments that he makes or claims to make in that 40-minute period with his first, I'll say 3 references, but in fact he actually only gave 2, and we'll deal with those and his argument. Also, what I want to do is comment on the boys' tactics a bit as well. From the standpoint, for those that don't already know, I'm probably singing to the choir here on my channel, but I imagine that this will end up on your channel as well, Phil, where not everybody follows me. My background is in academia, more than a quarter of a century of it. I hold 3 advanced research degrees, which is quite unique. They are in the areas of the physiology of rest and exercise, i.e. general physiology. They are also in specifically the cardiovascular pathophysiology area. In other words, what is it that causes heart disease, heart attacks, strokes, cerebrovascular accidents, a bit about the blood, how that works, all that kind of nonsense. And the third one concerns specifically pure and applied statistics, research methodology, and ethics. So I think I have a well-grounded base to take an overview position of everything that went on there and point to 1 or 2 things. So I'm looking forward to it. What do you want to say before we get going, Phil? Do you want to kick this off with any kind of background, introductory comments? Give us some sort of context here.
Yeah, sure. I mean, the first thing I'd love to say really is to appreciate you, Bart, because you have this science background and you don't wield it about like a cricket bat at random to everybody who isn't enormously scientific. You know, I have great respect for you, and you've shown respect for me and my unscientific, if you like, way of going by experience and the contacts that I have are listening to people who are tremendously knowledgeable in these kind of areas. I mean, I fix myself with a carnivore diet and whatever, and then I'll go look at the science that shows me that all of diet science is complete bullshit, and that's the way around I do it. But this is not acceptable to Dan. Dan is somebody I was introduced to by a mutual friend who set me up with a long email exchange with him last year, and it went on forever. It was interminable, and I found it absolutely exhausting, really, because I was just trying to make the point that there are other ways of looking at these things, and we shouldn't be completely and utterly based on studies, because he doesn't seem to have figured out that a lot of them are corrupt and inaccurate. And so we need other tools, and this is what I like about you, because we've had a load of chats and you've never come to me and gone, you're just not scientific, Phil, so you have nothing to say, which is basically Dan's viewpoint. And the email exchange was particularly excruciating. The talk, actually, excruciating as it is, believe me, was not as excruciating as the email exchange. Yeah, so I went on and I thought, yeah, I'm going to get hammered by the science and whatever, because he'll beat me over the head like, like vegan gains or something like that. However, I put it on my channel and I was absolutely blown away. I don't think I've had a negative comment yet. And the support was amazing. And it sort of brought a lump to my throat, really, that there are so many people out there seeing through this. So I won't waffle on too much. That's Dan. He's a sort of well-educated microbiologist, and he's very knowledgeable in what he's been told to believe. And there we go. So let's see what you got to say about our excruciating exchange.
Yeah. For my part, what I need to say also as a caveat up front is that when I said I'm focusing on the first 40 minutes or so of this, and that's what I've prepared for today, I actually haven't watched the whole thing right through, mostly, Phil, because it is so excruciating, as you quite rightly say, to sit through and watch this boy conduct himself in the way that he does. And I use the term boy meaning that very pejoratively. Having come from the background that I have come from, with the level of experience and knowledge that I have in science, I can tell you right up front, academically, this is a boy in short pants. And the tactic, I guess, that he has applied, I'll try to emulate just a little bit here, just so that people get an overview of what the tactics that this boy undertakes are. You'll see it for yourselves when he starts talking, but I just wanted to make it absolutely clear and apparent right up front before we even get into it. And here's an example of a sort of a discussion between him and yourself, Phil, that I've put together, that I'm going to lead, of course, because that's what Dan likes to do. He likes to lead the discussion around by the nose. He understands at least that he who asks the questions in a conversation is he who is in control of that discussion. And if people don't understand that, there's a bit of free advice for you to take away. Anytime you get into a discussion with anybody, make sure it's you who is asking the questions, not answering them. As soon as you get into the role of answering the questions, you're fucked, because they're going to lead you around by the nose. Okay, so here we go. I don't have a big wig that makes me look like I play for the Bay City Rollers or anything like that, Phil, but you'll just have to imagine. Phil, what happens if you turn the radiator up to 5, which is the maximum setting on the radiator? For those that don't understand that, with my incredible knowledge of science, I'll share that with you. I'll tell you that 5 is the highest setting, because 5 is higher than 4, isn't it, Phil? Now, what happens if you turn that radiator up to 5, Phil? Let it get up to full temperature and then place your hand on it. What happens, Phil?
Well, I would say you'd get burned, Dan.
Now, Phil, do you have any peer-reviewed science to back that claim? Can you point to a study, Phil? We'll wait. Where is your study?
I'm sorry, Dan. You've got me. I'm
right.
Done. I think I've seen.
Okay.
There, but I can't.
Okay. So I think what we're seeing here, Phil. Let me just interrupt you rudely, because that's what I do. Let me just say that on the basis of your response here, I think we can conclude that you're a conspiracy theorist, you're a nutter, and you have nothing to offer society. How can you go online, as you've just done, and tell people they will burn their hand on a hot radiator if you cannot support that with decent peer-reviewed empirical evidence, Phil? What are you doing, son?
I'm a
dangerous misinformation. You're a genocidal clown.
I'm a genocidal maniac.
That's right. That's right. Or, stepping out of that character now, I'm done with that. Or, what we can say is this. Through long experience of nearly 60 years on this planet, both intuition-wise and also experiential-wise, what you know, Phil, is that if you place your hand on a hot metallic surface, you're going to get burned. You don't need a peer-reviewed article to support that. any more than you need a peer-reviewed article to support your long experience dealing with clients who have significant autoimmune dysfunction caused almost certainly by a diet containing plant toxins, anti-nutrients, contraindicated fiber, etc., combined with your observations that when you suggest to people, without giving them advice, but suggesting to people that perhaps if they were to choose of their own volition to remove those things from their diet, they would probably almost certainly experience a vast improvement in their life. And fuck me, they do.
Well, it's all just useless anecdotes, isn't it? Really, and as I've been told
Yes.
by many fat dietitians, that I'm going against the science.
Yes. So, Phil, how can you possibly ignore the data like that, son? That is irresponsible for you to ignore the data.
My apologies. I've been put in my
I should
place.
think so too, because once again, I'm taking the moral high ground here. I'm in control. I'm asking the questions. And you, son, you are a conspiracy nutter. And I'm going to look down my nose at you. I'm going to discount your intuition and your experience of life, which is absolutely significant and useful and meaningful. And I am going to tell you what's what with my PhD certificate, the ink on which is probably still wet. And I'm going to splash a bunch of things up on the screen to absolutely prove you wrong for 2 or 3 seconds each, maybe, not analyze it at all, and take the Mike the Vegan approach to trying to swamp the discussion by mindlessly citing things and in so doing claim to be in league with the science and in control of the science and a high Jedi of this. As I say, this boy is not a high Jedi of the science. Having had a look at his sources up to the point that I've watched, and having looked at the actual data sets with the eye of an actually competent empirical scientist with multiple publications in the area of applied statistics and inference, this boy would not know the difference between his elbow and his asshole if I labelled both and then taught him to read. Okay? And the fact that he's picked on someone like yourself, Phil, who, this is not pejorative, but someone like Phil, who is an intuition-driven individual, who is an artistic individual, who is a musician, who works by experience and feedback of that kind, and to take the moral high ground and say, I'm a high priest of science and therefore you're a cunt, Phil. Disgraceful behaviour, and I think it speaks to a real ego problem that this boy has, frankly. Now, a lot of people have levelled the accusation at me that I have an ego problem or that I am arrogant or whatever. The difference between me and this boy is I can back it up. And I can go toe-to-toe, fist-to-fist, and we can get into the data and go, okay, here's why you've got this wrong. Here's how you've got this wrong, son. And that's what we'll do today. So we'll get started in just a minute. That's quarter an hour of preamble. I've kind of mapped out roughly a 2-hour session here today, boys and girls, for those that need to know. We're going to take a couple of hours to deal fully with about 40 minutes of discussion. And the reason for that is I really want to go deep here and I want to absolutely show where the flaws are in this boy's behavior and in his conduct and in his false claiming of moral authority and intellectual authority, actually, because there are many ways to know things. For example, Phil, it's already after dark there in Blighty now in the UK. At this time of the year, well and truly. In fact, it probably went dark nearly 5 hours ago, very early in the afternoon. However, at some time in the morning, probably around about maybe 9:15, 9:30 tomorrow morning, if you look to the horizon in the east, you'll probably see this big bright ball of gas burning in space rise above that horizon and once again light the world, won't you?
Absolutely, yes.
Do you have a peer-reviewed publication to back that claim, Phil?
You read my mind. Yes.
Okay, because this is the kind of dangerous misinformation, Phil, based on your experience, based on your intuition, that could be completely wrong, couldn't it, Phil? This could be very dangerous information, couldn't it, for people?
I know, and I can back it up with certain people in the street who've also witnessed the same thing, but they're probably
Oh, anecdotes, is it, Phil? Anecdotes. I see, anecdotes.
probably lying.
Right, yes. Well, they could be, couldn't they? Anyway, let's get into it a bit. It's been fun putting the preamble together and kind of giving that there. Jimmy says that Dan is an evil person. I don't think so, Jimmy. I don't think Dan is actually with malice aforethought trying to harm people. I don't think Dan is. I don't think Dan has an agenda other than to push his idea that he is scientifically competent because he holds a PhD. Not particularly difficult to do, by the way. And I think he does it largely because he enjoys the public masturbation of his adulous crowd of turds that follow him on his channel, giving him a reach around the whole time. I really think that's what drives him. And it gives him an opportunity to be as pompous as fuck and behave in the way that he does. I don't think it's evil. I think he has an ego problem. I think he has a very, very fragile ego. I think he feels a real need to prove himself. And in so doing, we can see how fragile he is by picking on someone with no scientific training, i.e. Phil, to have what he deems to be a scientific discussion with. Completely inappropriate. And by the way, I have made the invitation to Dan personally. I've said, Dan, you'd do yourself some favors if you actually wanted to take on a discussion on this topic with someone that can actually do some sciencing a bit. I know a bloke, he's me, you'd be welcome. Apparently he has accepted that invitation, at least at this point, prior to viewing this. He said he wasn't available to join us on this discussion, which I take to mean Dan is actually furiously watching this very, very closely to see whether or not I've got the goods and to see whether or not he actually wants to front up to an actual scientist who will absolutely carve him 7 new arseholes anytime he wants. And I suspect he'll run away with shit in his pants like everybody else who's ever thrown in or accepted a challenge from me, then watched one of my videos and turned around and gone, oops, no, thank you, I don't think so, because I'm going to get fucking destroyed here. So I suspect that's what's happening. So, hiya, Dan, nice to meet you, hiding there in the shadows. Perhaps get your hand off at Sun and front up for a discussion with me and we'll deal with it. Anyway, there's that. Jimmy says Dan is neither smart nor educated. I agree with both of those. He's indoctrinated. He's a gullible, indoctrinated, crazy person. Yeah, I agree. Okay, right. So, obviously, Jimmy is not the only one making comments in the commentary section there. As you can see, there's a lot going on there, but I'm just a bit focused on all my resources, and I don't want to get this all messed up. So, let's make a start on the video. The first 40 minutes or so, we'll just do the usual pause and respond as I feel inspired to do so. And we'll respond to what Dan's saying, what Phil's saying, possibly some of the things that might be being said in the commentary section on that video, on the live commentary replay. Basically, fairly, it's all open. The topic of the discussion between Phil and Dan on this occasion was the old Kung flu, the old Wu flu, the old China pox. Was the discussion there, and whether or not visiting Jabba the Hutt at his den of iniquity is indicated a good idea or not, and whether those who disagree with Jabba the Hutt and what he's about are dangerous conspiracy theorists who ought to all be lined up and shot, or whatever. That's what Phil and he spoke about, and that's what we'll be dealing with, starting pretty much now. Here it is. Okay, let's go.
All right.
Can you hear that audio?
Okay, so here we are. So, Phil, today we're here with you.
Okay, we can hear the audio, yes or no? Yes, good. Okay, let's go.
One sec, Dan. It says, please ask the host to give you permission to record.
Okay.
There's a little sort of permission-y thing somewhere. I forget where it is.
How do we do this?
I can't find it. 'Cause it's not...
Allow to record. There you go. That should do it.
Recording in progress.
All right, cool.
I probably should have edited this
here
bit
we
out,
are.
but
We're
there
here
you
with
go.
Phil. Phil and I guess, have been emailing for a very long time. And I titled this video Understanding Science because I feel like that's probably something that, in my opinion, maybe Phil is missing, an understanding of general science. So
there's the first inkling of it right there in his first sentence. I represent the science. Phil doesn't know the science. I'm going to take the position I have the science, and I'm going to science all over you, Phil. Okay then, son. Science away.
that's my opinion, and I'm coming into this with a hope that we can talk about science and treat this as a learning moment. Okay? So, Phil, why don't you introduce yourself?
Yes, a learning moment. We're going to teach you a lesson, Phil, you dangerous conspiracy nut.
And just say some things that you want to say.
Okay, all right. Well, great to meet you at last, Dan, after our many spats on email. And yeah, I mean, just to explain my doubts of a lot of science, not all of science. I'll try and be as quick as possible because I know Dan doesn't like me getting off subject, but I'm not getting off subject so much here. I'm just explaining why I do have doubts. Now, since the early 80s, I'm 60 this year. Since the early 80s, I've been very fascinated with health and diet. And I studied enormously. I didn't study in the classical sense, but I studied many different disciplines. And I wrote books on it. I thought that I knew everything about diet, and I was very fascinated with Ayurveda and all that sort of thing, which I completely misinterpreted, which is a very old science. And I decided that, you know, vegetarianism was the way to go, and plant-based eating, all that sort of thing. And I ended up very sick in 2010 with lots of metabolic issues, heart, liver, kidneys. I ended up with the killer of them all, really, which was psoriatic arthritis, which crippled me and ended my drumming career for a couple of years. And I had to look at what I thought I knew, and none of it was working. And so then I started looking at the science of it. I started going to medical doctors, that kind of thing. And I realized that pretty much everything I thought I knew about health and diet was completely upside down. And this was backed up by studies. I mean, the misapprehensions about it, misconceptions about it was backed up by these studies that are put out by the same kind of people who put out, excuse me, our health advice. And when I looked at actual studies, that weren't really financed by the big food and big pharma companies, I found a very different thing, which pointed towards what I had found and the way I healed myself. And I had to look at parallel sciences like anthropology, like deuterium depletion, like circadian biology, you know, and then you can start to see that really everything is upside down. Now, I've promised Dan I'm not going to go into all my ins and outs of diet. There's no point here. Just about my attitude to the science. And everything really, all the studies that are put out there are very biased, absolutely wrong, totally against our history as a species, as humans. And then I started looking at the science behind the COVID business. And I kind of smelt the same rat.
Phil, did you steal all that information from me without crediting me? I might have to sue you.
Did I?
Yeah, you must have done. I invented it, you know.
I'm terribly sorry.
And I invented science, and I'm in charge of the world. Oh, hang on, no, that's Frank. That's Frank we're talking about there, isn't it? Yeah. Sorry, Frank. It's all down to you, son. Anyway, let's carry on.
And I'd like to just use one little example before we go on. I won't go into, like I said, all the ins and outs of diet and how, you know, I think even fruits and vegetables are unnecessary, and these are the things we've been told. So, you know, my diet is, as far as most people think, extremely
Oh, that's it, Phil. You're a nutter. Clearly.
extreme as fully carnivore. I'm still here 6 years from doing that and totally healthy.
Just anecdotes, though.
So at the beginning of this COVID thing, the WHO put out something saying, here is how to stay healthy from COVID. And we must not eat animal fats, and we must eat seed oils. Now, what?
Wow, that is absolutely fucking criminal that they would be promoting that. Partially because, number one, seed oils positively activate two separate pro-inflammatory pathways. Thereby, they will have a deleterious effect on the immune system at large. And if anything, that will drag the immune system function down, not make it better. And all of that is based on exactly no experimental intervention science of any kind whatsoever. It's ideology. Absolutely fucking criminal. Sorry, carry on.
Whatever anybody thinks about diet, and a lot of people will disagree with me, obviously you haven't looked into the carnivore thing, but the most deadly thing in our diets is seed oils, without a doubt. These things were made for as soap making additives, they were made as machine lubricants, and they've created the heart disease epidemic, along with processed carbohydrates, obviously. But this is what's being pushed by the WHO. I would like to understand how I can possibly trust the same sort of people who put out the information about COVID when the evidence of my eyes as well, and the many contacts we have now turning round against the narrative, are saying something totally different. So I don't throw anything out. I look at everything. Dan, I think at times you thought that I don't, but I honestly do. I'm just not convinced, mate. I cannot trust the people who say many, many, many things, but that one thing in particular, that is genocide, to tell people to eat seed oils. Why should I trust them when they...
Yep, and as a scientist, I'll back you up on that, Phil. Absolutely. It is criminal, it's genocidal, it's contraindicated in the extreme. We have a mechanism which underpins the hypothesis, stating the very reasons why seed oils are so very damaging. It tracks, here's a thing Dan likes to say as well, and he'll say it later, it tracks really well the consumption of seed oils with a vast, undeniable increase in heart disease, cerebrovascular disease, dementia, obesiogenesis, type 2 diabetes, etc. in Western societies over the last 100 years that seed oils have been available and have been ubiquitous in our food supply. It's pretty much a slam dunk. We don't have experimental studies on human beings because they can't be done. But what we do have there is a pretty powerful inference. Much more powerful than anything else you will find in nutrition epidemiology, which, by the way, is not science. Let's make no mistake, nutritional epidemiology is not science. It makes inferences at various levels of quality. And the seed oil inference is the most powerful one available from anywhere within the nutritional epidemiological gambit, I guess. The rest of it, worthless.
Tell me that I should be taking a vaccine, and that's the way forward. That's what I'd like to know. So thank you for the opportunity for the intro.
Okay, so you don't trust the WHO because...
Right, so straight away, appeal to authority fallacy. Bam, right there. Oh, you don't trust the WHO. Well, why should you? At the end of the day, Dan, science is not litigated by appeal to authority fallacy. Science is not litigated by consensus, and science is not litigated by opinion, including yours, Dan. Science is litigated empirically. That means with numbers, Dan. That means with actual statistical procedure, statistical inference, which I'm pretty expert in some, and you clearly are not, which we'll get to very, very soon when you start actually trying to play with numbers and completely falling over your feet and so doing. It's as funny as fuck, but we'll get to it soon. So there you go, appeal to authority fallacy. Straight away, that makes you a boy in short pants academically. That is one of the most fundamental errors you can make as a scientist, is to go to appeal to authority. Wow, straight away.
Because you think that they put out incorrect diet recommendations. I never heard them say eat seed oil to stay healthy against COVID.
Personal incredulity fallacy, right there. I never heard them say that. Therefore, they didn't say it. Therefore, you're wrong. I have the science, Phil, and you don't, son. Remember, I'm the one who has the science, which he's about to show he has no such fucking thing. It's as funny as fuck. Right.
I did.
Okay.
Yeah, they were saying vegetable oils. You must eat vegetable oils and not animal fats. I mean, we've been eating animal fats for millennia.
I never heard them say that. You can provide a link to them saying that if you like, but I'm not aware of any.
That's a Richard Burgess tactic right there. That's a vegan gains tactic. Oh, well, you better post me a link then, because the only way to establish facts are links. Links is what's required. Great. Send me a link, would you, Phil, that the sun is going to come up about 9:15 tomorrow morning. How about send me a link that proves absolutely that you'll burn your hand if you put it on the radiator? No? Okay.
Anyone.
They say it in general, but they sort of co-opted the COVID thing anyway. I mean, this is the standard narrative. We should eat vegetable oils. We should eat, whole grains, all the most dangerous things to the human body. And so now I've got to trust them with something else. I mean, that's not just the one instance, but that is the most glaring one.
Okay.
Because everybody sorry, go on.
So like I said, you can send a link to that if you like, but so getting into trusting them on COVID science.
Okay, so the error, I guess, if there is an error there, Phil, and I'm not remotely being pejorative, because this is not your area, you're not trained in these kind of debates and their tactic and stuff. Never engage with someone who makes an appeal to authority other than to point out they're making an appeal to authority and say, have you got any data? If you want to make a positive claim as a scientist, you are responsible for supporting that claim with empirical evidence. Do you have any empirical evidence? Dan's position, the barrow that Dan is setting out here, or is about to, is that visiting Jabba the Hutt at his den of iniquity and subjecting your body to the experimental Jabba the Huttery is indicated. We should all do it, and anyone who suggests that we should not do it is a dangerous conspiracy theory nut. Okay, Dan, fantastic. You're making a positive claim there. You are responsible for backing that up with empirical evidence. Empirical evidence, son, takes the form of intervention-based, experimental, scientific discovery undertaken in the form of experiments. What you're going to need is a large set of genetically identical twins separated at birth and controlled throughout their lives for every aspect of their life, down to waking hours, sleeping hours, hours of light, quality of light, exercise, absolutely everything, food, absolutely fucking everything that could possibly affect their outcome in terms of catching the kung flu or not, or dying of the kung flu or not. You need to expose both those populations in that lab equally to an equal level of particles of the kung flu in the air that they breathe. And you need to see who gets the kung flu and who doesn't. And you need to do a statistical analysis on those two identical populations under control to make your case. Failing that, off to fuck you pop. You have not done science. You are indulging in ideology, spin doctory, smoke and mirrors, and propaganda. Those are the facts, whether you like them or not, Dan Wilson. Scientific inquiry is a disciplined inquiry. Anytime you step away from the required disciplines of science in terms of differentiating cause and effect versus an inference on cause and effect, maybe, As soon as you step away from absolute 100% discipline, you are adding error, you are adding unsurety is the word, you are adding doubt to your inference. And the thing that determines how good an inference is, when you look at it from the standpoint of an experienced scientist, is not whether or not the water is clear, because in terms of physiological sciences, health sciences, there are no studies with clear waters, because you cannot do such studies. You can't do them practically, you can't do them ethically, they are cost prohibitive. There's no way we are ever going to get actual science on human physiology, human health outcomes, as that relates to any intervention of any kind. So the question then becomes, how muddy are those waters? Not whether they are, because they all are. How muddy are they? And I can tell you that the so-called science surrounding Jabba the Hutt and his behavior in his den of iniquity is as muddy as fuck. You would not see your hand in front of your face if submerged in those deep waters, my friend. Those are the facts. Right, enough diatribe.
Just to jump in there for a sec, Bart, is Karinsky.
Please, absolutely.
Said he or she has just done a quick Google search and found this on the WHO website. Replace butter, ghee, and lard with healthier fats like olive, soy, sunflower, or corn oil when cooking. And
oh dear, Dan, it looks like you were wrong, son. Looks like you are clearly, absolutely wrong, and you should withdraw your well, I haven't seen it, therefore it's wrong statement, shouldn't you?
It's funny, isn't it? Because people say you have to send a link to this and that. I mean, if you've been paying attention to it, they say it the whole damn time, don't they? This is what they base everything on. So yes. It's not that you need to send one particular link. It's just common knowledge, really. But common knowledge is not good enough. One has to have a paper for every sentence.
Exactly. The sun will come up tomorrow. You will burn your hand on a hot radiator. Yes, and the WHO absolutely do promote a dangerous genocidal set of misinformation as that relates to how human beings should look after their health. Not just in nutrition, but in every aspect of everything they do. They are not a scientific organization. They are a bought and paid for sociological organization of crackpots, charlatans, and elitists who have only two agenda. Those being their bottom right-hand corner, how much money can they make, and can they control and subjugate the masses? That's what they exist to do. So that's why as soon as Dan said, oh, you don't trust the WHO then, straight away, his credibility from that point on in this entire discussion is absolutely fucking sub-zero. The man has nothing to offer whatsoever. And I'll be quite happy to eviscerate him publicly should he choose to front up to said discussion with myself, an actual scientist, who absolutely will, as I say, tear him 7 new assholes. And I'll even do it politely if he prefers. I do like to use the verbiage, as you've already noticed, those that haven't followed my channel much beforehand. I will call a spade on my own channel, and I will say fuck and this and all of that sort of stuff, mainly because my people love it and it garners a lot of clicks, actually.
It's funny because, you know, just sentence enhancement, it's marvelous. We both love it. It's great. But as soon as you start using it, then people use it as an excuse to say that you're not valid. Yeah, everything that you say is not valid.
Exactly. Or you could.
He had some scientist dude on, you know, I think some other microbiologist. I listened to a bit of it. But he had him on, and he does stay kind of quiet. You know, he doesn't shout and scream or anything. But this scientist got absolutely furious, and he ended up shouting and rage quitting. And I was saying that, you know, that he probably was the loveliest guy in the world, at home with his head in his hands going, how did I do that? How did I get so angry? And I said to him on email at one point to Dan, I said, you know, you are so infuriating, Dan, that Gandhi would punch you. And you know, and I'm just laughing about it. And he's saying, and then he turned it around at how incredibly aggressive I was and how I wanted to punch him in the face. I had to explain about fast to him.
Okay.
But it was a strange thing. But I think, you know, if you can, he might not agree to it just because you use the word fuck. But let's see. Let's hope he's a bit more open than that, because, you know, that's how people think. So if he's remotely as intelligent as he claims to be and bases his entire persona on, then he'll look past that and say, okay, here's a guy that can actually do some science. And this might be
to use his verbiage, this might be a good learning opportunity for everybody to understand the difference between an actual scientist and a charlatan pseudoscientist. Guess which one of us is which? And I'd also add to that, Dan, that if you live in a glass house, son, you probably shouldn't be throwing too many rocks. And also, we've all got mad with someone and rage quit on a discussion online. Those of us who have had any amount of online engagements with people, we learn from it. We do better the next time. I'm not going to judge anyone for doing that personally. And frankly, having watched even 40 minutes of this clown, even a couple of years ago when I was quite young at doing this online stuff, I probably would have done so too. For an example of that, have a look at my discussion with the so-called Dr. Ricky, where he ended up getting sworn at and all of that kind of stuff. And quite rightly so, but it didn't help my cause in the minds of some people. Those who are looking for reasons to discredit what I'm saying, rather than by discrediting what I'm saying, discrediting how I'm saying it. Obviously, that's a complete misdirect. That's smoke and mirrors. If you want to discredit what I have to say, have at it, Dan, because you're not going to be able to, son. I've spent 25 years making sure that everything I say is absolutely above reproach. I'm really fucking good at it. Okay, so have a crack, son, if you're hard enough. Anyway, let's make some more progress. We'll get to the actual argument soon, boys and girls, I promise.
It's whatever, vaccine recommendations, things like that. So you said you don't throw anything out, you look at it all. So I guess what have you looked at in terms of the vaccine recommendations? Are you just discounting anything they say because you don't like their diet recommendations, or are you...
So also now what he's doing is putting words in your mouth and offering you some rope to hang yourself with by telling you what you think.
looking at it and evaluating it?
He's asking the questions?
I'm looking at it and evaluating it because I've looked at the standard stuff, and I'm sorry, I don't retain studies and I don't collect them, and I don't even collect them for diet really, because I prefer practical applications. But the stuff that I'm seeing outside of the mainstream science is more convincing to me, simply because it's not just their diet recommendations, it's every single recommendation. You know, now we're getting into some very, very dodgy territory with really, you've got to admit, there's police states coming in, there's concentration camps being built, there's, you know, the response to it is absolutely off the charts wrong. And so, I think that if they addressed the main comorbidities and whatever, which they're not doing at all, and which kill far more people than COVID, even assuming the figures are correct, which I don't really believe from what I've seen from my frontline contacts. If they're right, they would.
Look at him wiggling there and getting pissed off because he can't control the discussion at this point. He can't mouth off. He has to sit there and politely listen to you actually being quite reasonable. And this is funny as fuck.
Would have much more success of showing people how to become healthy, whereas the people that we're supposed to trust are the ones who are making the billions out of it. I know, I'm sure you've heard all this before.
Yeah,
I can see you getting fed up with it.
So let's talk about you know, you're talking about.
So then he sounds Canadian when what he's talking about. Anyway, see how there he sat there and he wiggled and he was uncomfortable and he was annoyed listening to what you were saying. And then when you finally stopped saying what you had to say, which was perfectly reasonable, he now says, okay, let's talk about something completely different. Let's get back to my agenda. Let's get back to me controlling the discussion. Let's get back to me telling you, Phil, that you're a conspiracy nut. Let's go. By the way, has he produced a single piece of empirical evidence to support his posit yet? 9 minutes in. Not one. Zero. Fuck all. Keep that in mind.
At everything, not throwing everything out, but it seems like you're really emphasizing what you see in your day-to-day, your own personal experience.
Right, so just anecdotes though, just your experience, Phil. Remember, I have science, Phil. You don't have science. I have science, Phil. What do you think you're doing? Let me tell you some science and get it wrong.
Experience. Is that right?
Well, it's not just my own personal experience. I mean, we are in touch with many doctors on the front line because of what we do, and I won't mention what we do because I suppose you don't want to a quack like me advertising my services online. But, you know, for example, we have a pharmacist at the moment who's come across and is finding, he says now probably 90% of his colleagues are seeing through it, but they're too frightened to speak out because they're going to lose their livelihood and whatever. And we're just seeing this across the board now. I think that even if you're right about everything, the responses are hugely, hugely wrong and very frightening for humanity.
Right, okay, so I hear that a lot. People are afraid to speak out. I don't buy it. I know plenty of science.
Right, so personal incredulity fallacy again. I hear that a lot. All the conspiracy nuts are saying that, Phil. Ergo, I'm going to tar you with that brush, whether you are one or not. And I'm just going to say, I just don't buy it. But I'm not going to support that with anything substantive whatsoever. Nothing. What I am going to do, though, is say, I'm the scientist, Phil. I have the science, remember? And I'm still waiting for your reference, son, about whether or not the sun will come up tomorrow morning. Where's your empirical evidence for that one, son?
Scientists, I know plenty of doctors. I don't see.
I know plenty of doctors. You see, I know lots more doctors than you do, son. In fact, I've trained thousands of them. Anyway, that's for another day. Pissing contest.
That repeated. So, but we can compare our personal experiences, right? You know, supposed experts who are...
Supposed experts is what you know, Phil. Remember? They're supposed you're experts. The ones I know, they're not. They agree with me, therefore they're bona fide. Because I have the science, Phil. Remember? I'm the one with the science. Good. How much science has he produced so far, boys and girls? Oh, yes. The same amount as before. Still fuck all. Nil poir.
Afraid to speak out. I know plenty of experts who are...
Let's break down the word expert while we're at it just for fun. X is an unknown quantity and a spurt is a drip under pressure.
Well aware of the science and would disagree. So we could go back and forth with our personal experiences all day.
We could see who can piss higher up the wall too. Will it help? Will it actually help to litigate the case of whether Jabba the Hutt is a good idea or not? No, it will not. Only empirical evidence will support that claim. There is none, so we have to go to inference. How muddy is that inference? Muddy as fuck. Who's making the positive claim? He is. He is responsible for supporting that claim. He cannot do it. Ergo, this is a debate he cannot win before he even starts, except by claiming moral and intellectual authority over you, Phil, and telling you he has the science. Sounds a lot like Fauci, doesn't it? We're still waiting to see any science, Dan, any at all.
Doesn't get us anywhere. So how do we actually find out what's true? What's going on?
Well, we do that empirically, Dan. That's how science is litigated, remember?
In the world. Where do you look?
Well, we look at the empirical evidence. If it's something that is appropriate and lends itself to being established or refuted empirically. Many things aren't, like whether or not you're going to burn your hand on a hot radiator or whether the fucking sun will come up tomorrow. Okay? Whether or not it is indicated for the population at large to submit themselves to this dangerous experimental Jabba the Hutt procedure is something that we can litigate empirically. Well, we could if there was any clear empirical evidence, in other words, disciplined science to inform on that question. There isn't. Let's look at how muddy the waters are then in terms of any inference that might exist. Muddy as fuck. Whoops, sorry Dan, you lose. Because you're the one making a positive claim. That's the position to take in these debates. Don't make a claim. Let somebody else make a claim and then refute their claim on the basis that they cannot support their claim. Ergo, you don't need to disprove his claim. You don't need to prove your point. You don't need to prove your point. All you need to do is prove that his point is not established. Because it's not. Which I'll show empirically very soon.
To find that.
Well, Dan, I think that you shot yourself in the foot a little bit in a recent video where you've constantly told me on email that personal experience and anecdotes are pretty useless. I would agree until there's tens of thousands of them, you know, and I'm seeing that with the diet thing and whatever. And you said on this personal experience, when you were talking about how do you know about the transmission and how the vaccine helps that. Well, there aren't any.
Oh my God! Can you believe what he just did? Oh, you're boring me, Phil. Hello, lovely.
This is Peter. Peter, who I abused with meat.
Oi.
Yeah. Yes. So, Peter, given that you're being abused with meat there, how's the scurvy going, son? And how about that lack of development that we're seeing? Oops, he's gone. Bye.
He's off. Yeah,
right.
I'm afraid unjabbered and full of meat.
Yeah, exactly.
Extraordinarily, he's still alive.
Yeah. Where's the other one, Phil? Is she around?
She's in the living room here doing something.
Okay. Oh, if she shows up, she does, but whatever.
Come on.
Yeah.
Here's Amelia, also tremendously.
Hello.
Cheers.
Hello, cheers.
And Amelia, when it's not plaited, has a bigger fro than Dan. So nanny no.
Nanny,
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 nah.
nanny, 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 nanny. I've never.
No.
All right,
Yeah.
let Bart get on with it. I'm going to silence us again now.
Good. Maybe actually you should have had Peter and Amelia do this discussion with Dan. That would have been funny because he's more their level, frankly, in terms of his level of ability to engage with the world, I think. Anyway, yes, let's do make a little bit of progress.
Studies at the moment, but we see it in the community, and my jaw dropped, and I was like, Dan, this is what we're looking at. We've
Oh
got to
no,
look
there are
back.
studies. There definitely are studies showing that vaccination reduces transmission in the community. It was
No, there are not, Dan Wilson. False. Not one. Not one exists. There are no intervention-based experimental studies that can support that posit. False. Cite one, and I'll show you what's wrong with it, sunshine.
studied in the community.
Well,
Oh, well, there's your first clue. The first clue. Studied in the community. That is not a controlled experiment, is it, Dan? Many confounds, many degrees of freedom, uncontrolled. Many things can affect your outcome that you have not accounted for. As I say, feel free to cite the study, Dan, to me, and I'll look through it with a fine-tooth comb and I'll show you what's fucking wrong with it. Okay?
you actually said, that we're seeing that in the community, and that's what I've been saying all along.
Because that's what
seeing it in the community.
Because those who have studied it in a community setting see that.
Well, doing something in a community setting is not a study, Dan. A study is an experimental, scientific approach to answering a question on cause and effect. What you're talking about is a naturalistic observation, which is pseudoscientific, poorly disciplined at best, and probably fatally flawed on multiple counts. As I say, though, feel free to cite it to me and I'll point to exactly where those flaws are for you, any day of the week or twice on Sundays. Sunshine, what's next?
That isn't quite what you said, but
It's exactly what I said, and I linked the study in the description.
Yeah, so to say I linked the study somewhere else is no good, Dan. If you want to bring this study that you're referring to here into this discussion, which is a separate discussion, then you cite it again. Or feel free to send me an email, Dan, and cite it to me there. And then front up live on camera on my channel, and I'll tear it to pieces for you. Because it's fucking nonsense. I can tell you that without ever even looking at it. I will be able to pull the thing to bits in 5 minutes or less. Okay? Sorry about that. Science.
So, did you look at that study?
no, I didn't. Not in that particular video, but I looked at a lot of studies that you sent me.
Okay, so
But I did.
So why are you ignoring the data, Phil? I gave you some data to look at. Why are you ignoring it? I gave you an opportunity to read some data, Phil.
This is the weird thing, because he's so utterly convinced by studies. He thinks that if he sends studies, they're going to convince you immediately and you're going to put your hands up and say, oh yeah. But I read them, and to me, really, it's not, it doesn't get me, But there was this point that he's really evading, where in one of his videos he said, there are no studies to do with transmission, but we see it in the reduced transmission, but we see it in the community. And he's saying, I never said that. He did in one of his videos. And because it totally stunned me. I would never have mentioned it if it hadn't stunned me that much. And I thought, man, you've just, absolutely proved my point. Sometimes we have to look at something apart from studies. That was all.
Yep. Quite so. Unbelievable, Dr. Ryan. How could you not have heard of Dan Wilson? I hadn't either, by the way. He's a legend, though, in his own mind, in his own lunchtime. Yeah, it's nuts. It's one of those. this is a bloke that will use an argument to suit himself and then use the same argument under the same sort of set of underlying assumptions to try and refute something that you've said. It's pathetic. At the end of the day, all of this is wordsmithery, it's smoke and mirrors and fuckery of the highest order. If you want to litigate science, which is what Dan is claiming, I'm the scientist, he says, then you do it empirically. That means numbers. That means data sets. That means let's look at the raw data supplied by whichever authors, not their write-up of their data, because that's an interpretation. Let's look at the raw data and see what it actually does say with the eye of a competent statistician such as myself. Dan doesn't want to do that, I'll bet you anything you like. What he wants to do is sit there and be pompous and claim to be the science. Okay, sorry Dan, nil point, fail. Right, what's next?
I did hear that you were saying we see it in the community.
Yeah,
and it was something to some aspect of it where you said there aren't any actual studies at the moment.
Right, so 12 minutes in, not one single piece of data from Dan, the scientist, who's all about data. If he's a scientist, he's all about data. 12 minutes, not a single data point. Just ideology and propaganda and pomposity, inappropriate pomposity, and the claiming of moral and intellectual authority to which he is not entitled. Good.
Moment, but we can see it in the community.
I never said that.
And okay, I don't think that I would have picked up on that if it hadn't have made my jaw drop. But I think that it's important that we do see this in the community. And
there's a comment in the chat there underneath the video that we're watching, and it's someone called Dog Walker saying, "Oh dear, the anti-science trolls are in the chat." Okay, I'll tell you who the anti-scientist is here. Dog Walker, sorry. That's the one with a big afro. Anyone who claims to be a representative of science, someone who claims to be in control of the science or have the science at his beck and call, behaves like a scientist, and this guy does no such thing. Okay, that's anti-science. That's propaganda. That's what Dan is doing here. He's propagandizing, and you're stupid enough to suck that lollipop and give him a nice big reach around while you're there. Pathetic. What's next?
Since the beginning of this COVID thing, maybe I'm in a lucky area, although they do say the northwest of England is hard hit, but that's not what my partner has seen, who is a nurse in hospitals. And I don't really know anybody who's had any particular difficulty with COVID.
Look at him fidgeting, eyes darting around, can't sit still, can't wait for you to stop talking so that he can jump all over you and once again claim authority and claim to be better than you are, Phil, and point to the fact that you're a mad conspiracy theorist nut job. God, if you'd just shut up, Phil, and just let him tell you that'd shorten the whole thing down quite a bit. Goodness sake, what are you doing, son, with all your opinions and talking and stuff?
Or long COVID, as they call it, any more than they have with the after effects of flu if they don't know how to take care of their health.
So is the thing here? Sorry, is the
okay? So now you just can't wait anymore. So he's going to jump over the top of you, and then say sorry. He's not sorry. He could not wait anymore. He couldn't stand it anymore. He has to talk. He has to ask questions. He has to be in control of the situation in his mind.
Thing here that you don't believe it because you don't personally know anybody who has dealt with it. Is that right?
So now what he's saying is personal incredulity fallacy is wrong. The very thing he himself used several times already. Oh, I've never heard that being said. He said, didn't he? What a fucking hypocrite. Incredible. I'm going to enjoy our discussion, Dan, if you actually want to front up to it. I doubt you will, but there you go.
What about people who would tell you that they know people who have suffered from it, or people who have lost? Would you deny their experience? Like, how does that work? How does that work in your mind?
No, I wouldn't deny their experience at all. And I wouldn't in any other year, but I'm not seeing a difference from any other year. However,
you're not seeing a difference from any other year.
I am seeing a huge difference.
Okay, so now he thinks he's got you. Now he thinks, I've got you now, Phil, because you've just said you're not seeing any difference from any other year in terms of, I guess he's talking about mortality, because those are the figures he's about to bring up to prove you wrong. Here we go, have some numbers, bitch. The first time he is actually going to lay some numbers on you, well, let's see what happens.
since the jabs. And I've had personal friends who've had strokes. I've had people who have had myocarditis. They've had problems. I just don't think it's the way to go. We're seeing huge amounts of issues with the reactions to the vax. And there is this, you know, the VAERS thing, which you discount, and the yellow card system. I think you're not too keen on that. But there are so many, you know, if there was like 1,000 reports or something like that, but there's so many.
So I'm sharing this with you. You don't believe that this year has been any different from any other year.
I think there were spikes. I think there were spikes during the care home thing when they murdered people with midazolam and morphine. And
so take a look at this for a second. Take a look at this. This is excess deaths by country. So these are figures that are compared to a 5-year baseline.
Okay, so there's
the blue line, I believe, is 2021, and the red line is 20.
Spacebar's not working. I'll have to do it that way. All right, so there's the first error on this data set, Dan. Excess mortality over a 5-year baseline. Who's to say the 5-year baseline is indeed in line with what we can expect? Just because it has been the case for the last 5 years, is that in line with the last 50 or the last 100? Or indeed, can we project that forward to the next 5 or 50? No, we can't. It's just a reference frame of some kind. Okay, what was all-cause mortality on average per year in these different countries here for the last 5 years? And here is last year's figures, which Dan is about to say there was excess mortality over that 5-year baseline. Okay, great. What's next?
2020. These are excess deaths relative to a 5-year baseline.
Fucking ads.
I started making videos for social media because I felt...
Piss off.
The United States experienced 640,000 excess deaths at the time.
Great, 640,000 excess deaths last year in the United States over and above their 5-year baseline. Fantastic. What is the population of the US, Phil?
Do you know what? I don't know. Is it like...
I'll tell you, since I've got the science and you don't know anything. Since you don't know anything and I've got the science, I'll tell you. I think it's 330 million, give or take.
Yeah.
Right. Who would like to do a little fun game here? Let me do it here with my little calculator here. What did he say? 660,000 excess deaths? Is that what he said? So let's take 660,000 and let's divide that by 330 million. Okay, so that is an increase over the last 5 years, last year, of about 2 per 1,000, or 0.002. 2 extra deaths per 1,000 head of population. Probably well within the signal to noise ratio, i.e. what that 5-year average, that would be from different numbers every year in the last 5, some higher, some lower. I would suggest that 2 in 1,000 is probably well within that range of error. Probably completely and utterly meaningless, probably doesn't point to a damn thing. Sorry about that. Statistical inference does not support you, Dan Wilson, on that one whatsoever. It just says that last year there were 660 or 2 in 1,000 more deaths than there were for the average of the 5 years previous to that. So there's your second error on this data set. Whoopsie, son. Whoopsie daisy.
Time of this publishing. You can see the figures for any other country that's listed here. So when you see this and you say you consider everything, when you consider this...
Yeah, so Dan, there you go. Dan's taking the moral authority, the high ground there. You say you look at everything, Phil. You say you look at everything, but here are some numbers that absolutely prove you wrong. But actually, Dan, you haven't looked at these numbers in the way I just did. There are 2 quite different ways of ignoring the data, Dan. Phil's manner of ignoring the data is to say, I don't understand the data. I'm not a trained scientist. I think this is smoke and mirrors and fuckery. I have a number of contacts, including my good self, who over many years have educated the masses to understand where the statistical smoke and mirrors and fuckery is. That's what I do, for example. And I am of the mind that this is probably nonsense. I can't point to it myself because I don't have that training, but I'm quite happy that that's the case. Dan's manner of doing exactly the same thing as you're doing, Phil, ignoring the data, is by splashing it up on the screen like this. This is someone's interpretation of data. This is not even a raw data set. This is some graphs prepared by someone who have looked at the raw data and saying, look, here's proof that you're wrong, without actually analysing that data at all. Exactly in the manner I have just done to show that 2 in 1,000 is probably within the range of normal error from year to year. There's probably nothing to see here on mortality from the United States last year. Whoops, Dan, that's a shame for you, isn't it? Oh dear. Let's move on.
What do you think?
I think that I've seen conflicting graphs. I think that I've
Where?
seen a lot of graphs. You know, one of the guys in our team that I work with puts together a lot of data.
So how do you figure out which graph is correct?
I don't know, Dan.
Well, you have to be a competent statistician. You have to go to the raw data set yourself. You don't look at anybody's interpretation of data, which is what this is. If you see some synthesized data into charts and tables with some text underneath it to say what it says, you're not looking at the raw data set. You're looking at somebody else's interpretation of the data set, which is probably flawed because most people that put these things together are not remotely fucking competent to do so. Whoops. So, Dan says to you repeatedly, and even in the first 40 minutes of this thing, oh, it looks to me, Phil, like you're just ignoring the data. Well, Dan, you're doing exactly the same thing by not analysing the data and pointing to a proper, competent and robust analysis and synthesis of that data set. You're not even looking at the data set. You're looking at some pretty charts put together by somebody else. Another appeal to authority, another fallacy, another fundamental flaw, another pointer directly to your status as a boy in short pants academically, son. Okay? Let's move on.
I really don't know.
So then why are you saying that why are you saying that there's nothing? Why are you
Well, he's saying there's nothing because he understands, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, Phil, but I think you're saying that because you understand inherently in an aha sort of a sense, without being able to point to it in the way I've just done, that this is fucking bullshit.
Well, yeah, man. I mean, you know, you see all of these graphs and charts and stuff like that. The same as with studies in diet, you know, they show exactly what somebody really wants them to show. And it's very difficult. So no, yes, Dan's right. And you're right. I don't go to the source data and this and that, but I look at it and I think, okay, what is actually matching up with what we're seeing, what we're hearing about the mistreatment in care homes? My partner had been into them. She was in them. Dan wasn't at these kind of times and seeing these awful things going on. And you know, if there are spikes in deaths, well, it's probably to do with that because most of the deaths early on were in the care home. So what happened there? Was it COVID? Or was it,
No.
you know, was it the mistreatment of these people and also the DNRs and also that the midazolam business, you know, which people are bringing lawsuits about now. So to me, that's what I look at. I look at the human aspect of it, not these fucking charts and this and that, because they do show different things. I see other things where it shows there's no excess deaths. So what do? Do I go look at the data? No, I just say, listen, what's happening on the front line there, Dan? He's never been there, to be honest. That's what bothers me.
Yeah. I mean, I agree with you absolutely, Phil. I don't think Dan has remotely been out there in the world and has anything like the life experience that you would need to actually view your academic qualifications such as they are for Dan at his quite young age. He has a credential, he has a PhD in a specific, specialized, focused field of biological science, that being a particular protein synthesis within one of the organelles inside the cells. Very, very focused, basically. So what I say about PhDs are that a PhD means basically that you mean an awful lot about fuck all, mostly. And that's what we've got here. You have to go out in the world, you have to apply your trade, you have to do stuff to understand where that qualification, where that knowledge, such that it maybe actually sits in the real world and what its real value is, instead of sitting on top of that claiming that as your throne and claiming moral superiority and intellectual superiority over everybody else who doesn't have that same level of knowledge or better. And in fact, probably when challenged by someone like myself, who clearly, absolutely, patently will lead this boy around by his nose and tear him 7 new arseholes and fucking destroy him in a debate any fucking day of the week, that he will run away with shit in his pants. That's how these boys work, all of them. And they'll all say, it's because he's rude and swears. Well, I promise, Dan, or anybody else that wants to debate me, if you would prefer me to conduct myself without swearing or being rude to you for the entire debate, I will do so. And I will still tear you to fucking pieces without swearing, because I have those goods. Anyway, if you've got the balls, front up for it. Let's make some more progress.
Telling your audience, and you have an audience, why are you telling them that there's nothing if you don't know how to fix?
Yeah, Phil, why are you misinforming your audience? Why are you being such a misanthropist? Why are you telling people not to visit Jabba the Hutt? Goodness me, can't you see that 660,000 people died last year? Don't you care about 660,000 deaths, Phil?
Yeah, he tried
Yeah,
that
that's
one.
true.
It's because I cover up my diagnosis of psychopathy, but
Yes, I thought so. Yeah.
Well, I'm not saying that there's nothing. I'm saying that as far as I've seen, there's been spikes. And
You told me that it's no different from any other year.
And it isn't probably. Two in 1,000, Dan. Now look at the values, the absolute values for the last 5 years, and tell me that 2 in 1,000 is outside that range of normal error. Whoops. Sorry, son. Fail. You've tripped over your boots there, haven't you, sunshine? Whoops, an actual scientist has just caught you out. Dear oh dear. Propaganda. Fail.
Yeah, but it depends in what circumstance. You know, early on, I think, well, I know because I've seen many hospital handover sheets, many, the medical records with COVID tacked on the end. They didn't know, they were in a panic, they didn't know what was going on, and it was tacked on. There weren't any autopsies.
Oh, there were plenty of autopsies early on.
Yeah, there are now. I think I sent you one from, report.
All right, so now Dan is inferring or implying that he's read all the autopsies. I know what's in the autopsies, Phil. I've read the autopsies. No, you fucking haven't. 660,000 of them. Fucking ridiculous.
Reports from pathologists who are showing a lot of damage to the heart muscle, after the vax. So
yeah, that wasn't published. That was
Oh, not published. Okay, so here we go. Peer review veracity fallacy. Anything not published in a scientific journal is ergo therefore not true. Whoops. That's a fallacy, isn't it, Dan? How do we prove that? Well, pretty simple. Let's go back to an earlier point again, shall we? And now, Phil, at about 9:15 in the morning, your time, son, what's going to happen?
I don't know, Dan. I'd have to call a study up.
Yes, you would, wouldn't you? Good call not to make such a ridiculous claim that the fucking sun will rise. Okay, let's move on.
believe Susri Bhakti, who I've debunked several times on my channel.
I don't believe that you'd be capable of debunking any. I don't think you could debunk your way out of a wet paper bag, Dan, frankly. This is a bloke who wants to splash pretty charts up on the screen and think that's doing science. Sorry, sunshine. It's not. Doing science is looking at raw data sets and looking at the actual inference, statistical power, all those kind of things that I bet my bottom dollar you couldn't sit down and actually do the calculations yourself. I've taught these calculations for 25 fucking years, sunshine. Come and try that with me. Okay?
He didn't publish those. He didn't publish that. He didn't show any actual data.
Publish a lot of stuff, Dan, but
okay, that's not a debunkment. Didn't publish it. No, not real. Sun won't come up tomorrow because I haven't seen it in a peer-reviewed journal. No, you won't burn your hand on a hot radiator. I haven't seen any data to prove it. No, come on, Phil. Stop being a nut. Stop being a conspiracy theorist. Fancy suggesting that heat burns.
But you debunk a lot of stuff, right? And that's great,
But
there are so many waves and waves.
The other thing, the third error, before we move on too much more, the third error on the interpretation of that data set he's just shown, not even a data set actually, some pretty graphs that show 660,000 excess deaths in the US last year. That, Dan, is death from any cause whatsoever. Be that COVID, or being struck by lightning, or run over by a fucking bus, or how about this? A vast increase in recorded suicidality due to all lockdowns, loss of job, loss of financial position, loss of house, breakups with family members over this ridiculous fucking nonsense because we all have to fight amongst ourselves about it. Exactly what they want us doing, by the way. What else could increase mortality? Oh, how about missed diagnoses of things because of the health system being under stress in the initial phase because of a large number of inappropriate hospitalizations, inappropriate intubations, inappropriate use of morphine and other things, as Phil has correctly alluded to, and more latterly, a health service being under stress by, firing half their fucking staff, for example.
But you made a great point now. I mean, we have a pharmacist who's now come on to the Red Pill Revolution team, and he was inspired by our book to not to give him any knowledge, but to just have the understanding of how it's led up to this and to speak out. He was a pharmacist. He was running a vac center in England, and he has now quit that. He's given up a lucrative career. He's speaking out against it. And the stuff that he said about the beginning of this whole thing, where he said he thought this was like a massive pandemic. He thought that they were very frightened. The whole of the NHS were terrified. He was too, and then he started to realize that it really wasn't that bad. And he's charted it out. There's videos of him on a redpillrevolution.com on our website, and he's amazingly brave, this guy. And Dan calls him a deluded fool who read our book and we've got him under our spell or whatever. And nothing could obviously be further from the truth, but it is very interesting to see what happened at the beginning of this thing and how all those mistakes were made. Somebody put up in the chat here about the intubations, and people were panicking and doing that. And then docs were coming on, changing shift, turning up the pressure, panicking, blowing lungs up. These people were killed. I don't think there was any bad intent behind it in the hospital itself, but these people panicked. They're just human beings. They're not gods. They're not gods of science. And this is what was happening.
Yeah. Now, do you know what the odds are, Phil, for any given patient whatsoever? As soon as you intubate that patient, what are the odds of extubating that patient successfully and them surviving?
I hear it's extremely low. Also, the drugs they give with them that basically put you in a coma and paralyze you. They're
20%.
Horrific. Yeah. Horrific.
20%.
Yeah.
8 out of 10 people who are intubated die.
Yeah.
And especially if you're going to intubate someone who does not fucking need intubating because they have a flu, which has led to a respiratory issue because of a vast immune system reaction to a specific protein, i.e. the spike. What should have been done with those patients is they should have been treated for that condition, the allergic immune response to that spike protein. To mechanically interfere with their respiration in a completely contraindicated and vastly dangerous fashion, let's throw some morphine on top of that and some other drugs to make sure we induce a coma so that we can intubate them and can control their breathing mechanically, blow their fucking lungs up, etc. Absolutely fucking incompetent and criminal. Unfucking believable. And the fact that Dan is not a physiologist, has nothing at all in the way of training in medical sciences or health sciences at all, means that he should shut his ignorant mouth on this topic, frankly. He's completely out of his fucking lane in so doing. It's disgraceful behaviour, and it's exactly the sort of thing that a boy with an ego problem would do. Dan. So, there we go. That's that one. What's next?
Waves of people who you haven't debunked yet, who are coming out all the time and speaking out against.
The other thing I know it's labouring a point and singing to the choir with my crowd, but guys, let's say just for fun that this is a vastly dangerous, hugely problematic pandemic that we are experiencing here. Were that the case, that would be reflected in the mortality statistics. You can't hide those. There's nowhere to hide. Someone's either dead or they're not dead. Okay. if there have been 660,000 extra deaths from all causes in the US in the last year, which is probably within the range of error and as such nothing, I think we're done with that argument, aren't we? I have seen multiple freedom of information requests sent by people in the UK, for example, to various city councils, major cities, major boroughs in the UK, asking for the number of people either buried or cremated in that city last year. Every single one of the responses to those Freedom of Information Act requests has come back with a range completely in the norm. Where is the fucking pandemic? We have a pandemic of people being, yeah. We have a pandemic. Go on.
So sorry, Bart. Have you heard the funeral director speaking out? You must have done.
Yeah.
Very telling. If anyone knows, they know, eh?
Yeah. And if anything, what they are seeing is a vast relative increase in the numbers of young people they are dealing with in the funeral homes. The cause of death being, so as being reported to said funeral home directors, as myocarditis. Goodness me. Incredible. I can't think for a second why that might be happening. There we go. So that's what's going on there. I mean, if we have a pandemic, what the pandemic is it's a pandemic of cases. Cases being defined as persons who have returned a positive PCR test result. And we'll get to that in a bit. But we better make some progress because we're getting a bit behind.
And not just people who are as extreme as, say, Stefan Lanka, you know, and I hope he's right. I do, but I don't know. I don't know at all. I mean, there was a very, very wise doctor, professor, I think, once, and I forget the name, I forget which med school, but he used to say to the new students, and again, I forget the percentage, I'm not as good with things as you, but let's say 50%, but he said, well, 50% of what you're going to learn in med school is rubbish, but we just don't know which 50% yet. And I put it to you that over history, we have had the basis of things completely wrong many, many times. You know, the flat earth thing, for example, if you like. And so, you know, before somebody calls me a flat earther. And so, you know, things have become accepted that previously were not true. And not everything about virology adds up to me in my logic, in my heart, in my intuition. I'm sorry, I do rely on those quite a lot. And it just doesn't really quite add up.
Okay,
if there are excess deaths, I cannot say what they were down to. I really can't, because a lot of people are saying that many of those figures and those COVID cases were not accurate. The flu disappeared, for example.
Phil, you might be misunderstanding something. Those graphs, those are excess deaths. Those are not COVID deaths.
There you go. So even Dan, who has short pants, academically understands they are not COVID deaths. In fact, the exact number of deaths that we can attribute cause and effect to COVID so far in this pandemic worldwide is none. Not one. Because there is no medical technology available which can diagnose this particular pathology. It does not exist. We'll get to that if we get time to as well. So
those are just excess deaths above the norm. This was not connected to measuring COVID cases or anything like that. These are just deaths that occurred way beyond the norm. So the question is, what caused that? Well, those excess deaths do track with cases and deaths of COVID.
Right. And while looking at things that track with other things, let's look at how drownings in swimming pools in the US tracks with the release of movies starring Nicolas Cage. There is a powerful correlation between those events. The coincidence is stunning, unmistakable. Therefore, the reason for drowning in swimming pools, Dan, is release of movies by Nicolas Cage, is it?
Now, Bart, that is a statistic I'm aware of. So you see, I do study the science.
Oh, there you go. Here's another one for you, by the way. If you look at the incidence of shark attacks at Miami Beach as that correlates with the sale of ice creams at beachside ice cream vendors at Miami Beach, you will find a powerful correlation between those two events as well. Therefore, in order to prevent shark attacks, what we must do is outlaw the sale of ice creams at Miami Beach. Is it, Dan? You fucking idiot. That is the most fundamental schoolboy error it is possible to make in science. You have just ascribed, by inference, a causal artifact to what is a coincidental relationship. Let's all say it together. Correlation cannot establish causality, not now, not in the future, not in the past, not ever. Go to fuck. Go directly to fuck. Do not pass go. Do not collect $200. Dan, you absolute boy. Pathetic. What is next?
They track with the waves that we saw.
Also, what else tracks with the pandemic waves and that kind of thing? Well, it's the lockdowns, because every time there's a wave of positive PCR tests, then they lock us down again, and then people get fucked off and kill themselves. There you go, spurious correlation, Dan. Goodness me.
They are consistent with the actual COVID numbers, but the excess deaths are an independent figure. So if you have another reason that you can argue reasonably that caused all those excess.
Can you argue anything reasonably, Phil? I'm the scientist here. See how reasonable Dan is being? When he is challenged by an actual scientist who can see through his completely unreasonable sophistry and point to it directly and incisively. And I think you're quite right that he won't turn up, Ryan. I think you're quite right. If I was him...
But I can just never control my aggression.
Well, exactly, Phil. I know. You're so aggressive. You're so aggressive, love. You always have to be on top. Always the pitcher, never the catcher. Goodness. Okay, right.
Deaths, then you might have something. But I haven't heard anything.
This is the reason that I think if there were spikes at certain points, and assuming that you're right and there are, they also tracked the times when there was a lot of people being murdered by the midazolam and morphine horrors in the care homes. And the average age of those
people
deaths
are not
was
being murdered
very
by
low.
Okay, so no, Phil, you're wrong. Because I say so. Personal incredulity fallacy again. And once again, I'm going to claim authority because I'm the scientist, Phil, and you're just some nut saying that people have been murdered by inappropriate medical practices. Well, Dan, do you know what the third highest cause of mortality in the US is in the last 50 years? Every single fucking year? Medical misadventure, son. Okay, there's nothing miraculous or surprising that medics fuck up. They do it every day. Millions of people die in the US every fucking year because of medical misadventure. Really, son, get a clue about anything.
You know, Bart, I always point out on that one because I think the top two are cancer and heart disease, right? And how much of that is caused by misinformation as well. So it's probably the leading cause of death, isn't it, really?
Yeah, well, yeah, again, because, again, you know, medics should not be commenting on nutrition. They're not trained in that. They're trained in allopathic medicine, not nutrition. Right, we seriously need to make some progress to get to my main coup de grace. So let's go.
People are not being murdered in care homes.
I've seen it firsthand. It was quite horrific at the beginning of this thing.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there's lawsuits being brought against the English government for that at the moment.
Lawsuits can be brought against practically anything.
I know. I'll accept that.
So what?
But these are, let's see, in the UK.
What were the average age of these deaths? They were something like above the national average, weren't they? The sort of COVID-related deaths.
Yeah, plus 80.
So the same people who would have died in any other year have died pretty much of that. I understand.
These are 110,000 excess deaths at the time this paper was written in the UK.
Okay, 110,000 in the UK. What's the UK population, Phil? Do you know that one?
Do you know it don't anymore? Is it 60 million?
I was going to say, I think last count it was about 66. So let's just assume, because I've got the science, Phil, and I know everything and you know nothing, that we'll go with my figure. Just because, why not? That's the appropriate thing to do here, obviously, because you're a conspiracy nut. But let's go 110,000 excess deaths in the UK, and let's divide that by 66 million population in the UK. And oh, look at that. It's 2 in 1,000. Goodness me, isn't that amazing? 2 in 1,000 in the States and 2 in 1,000 in the UK. It's almost there's a 2 in 1,000 increase in both of those populations. Maybe COVID had a role to play in that, but not death from COVID. Maybe it's the suicide rate. Maybe it's the misdiagnoses because of the failing healthcare system, because of the destruction of the healthcare system from within. Maybe it's the cancelled procedures that surgeons have been unable to do and people have died as a result of that. Maybe it's people dying in hallways in hospitals because they can't get a bed because half the staff have been bloody fired or something. I don't know. Could be any of those things. Anyway, must make some progress. Thank you very much, Clark, by the way, for the very fine Norwegian kroner. We appreciate those very much. Do feel free, boys and girls, to send a few shekels our way, and we will divvy up the goodies later.
Is that acceptable?
No, but I don't think the measures are. I think they could have.
What's wrong with the measures?
Well, I've pointed out what's wrong with the measures several times, Dan. That's not Phil's training. I wouldn't have expected him to be able to do that. I can, and I have done. Whoops. You don't have an argument, do you, Dan? And you fucking know it. Well, if you didn't know it, you do know it now, don't you? Whoops.
What's wrong with the
Let's
measures?
assume your figures are absolutely perfect. Let's assume that for the moment, and they might well be. So why did they not tell people how to?
Buffering.
Be in the top 1%, let alone the top 99%.
Seriously? The world hates me, Phil. Oh, no. Hate it when that happens. Oh, anyway, let's see what's happening in the chat while the buffering is occurring. I live rurally and usually the internet is very good, but sometimes it just gets a bit whatever. Okay, so Amanda says, good point by Phil. I think so too. I think you made a lot of good points, Phil. I really do. But basically every time you made a good point, he redirected and changed the attention back to his agenda, and once again claimed moral authority and intellectual authority without the goods to actually do so. And he actually didn't deal with any of your very good points whatsoever. He just ignored them. It's another way of ignoring the data, Dan, the very thing that you accuse Phil of all the time, ignoring the data that doesn't suit you. It's called cherry picking, by the way. It's not acceptable in science, not whatsoever. What else is going on here? That 1914 study is still on the CDC, even on their own website, disproving contagion. Okay, so that's people talking about the germ theory versus the terrain theory thing. What I'm going to do is reboot this page and see if that helps. Ads in 5 seconds. No, it doesn't help at the moment. Okay. Adverse reaction deaths. Yep. Okay. So there's quite a few of those going on, quite likely. There's some talk about the Nuremberg version 2.0 trials that may or may not be occurring, depending on which news outlet you follow, whether you follow the accredited media or whether you follow the actual news that's being collected by people around the world. Okay, well, while that's happening, it seems we can't get any sense out of the old interwebs in terms of telling us a bit more about what's going on there. What happens next, the coup de grace bit, is that Dan makes a claim that visiting Jabba the Hutt leads cause and effect to a large change in your risk of being hospitalized. He suggests that if you visit Jabba the Hutt, you are vastly less likely to be hospitalized with COVID. And he also makes a whole bunch of other claims around that, and he brings some data up, which is CDC, or Center for Disease Control data, and he does the same. Let's look at some graphs that show my point and prove you absolutely wrong, Phil, once again, you dangerous mad lunatic, you. And he pompously does that and carries on like a complete wanker. So let's deal with the data that he actually brings up, shall we?
Just a quick one from the chat while
Yep,
Bart
absolutely.
bringing something up.
Yep.
Jonathan Griffiths, when is Phil releasing the nutrition red pill rendition revolution? Well, we've got that book almost done, and I think I think it's a beast. Actually, it's really good. But in the next couple of months, we've gone further than the other one and really had a pop at the system. But there we go. Not long, couple of months.
Awesome. Very, very good. Very, very good. Okay, so here we have a graph. This is the COVID-19 associated hospitalizations. So it says. There it is. Between January and November of 2021 in the US. And in the green, it says here, rate in fully jabberized Jabba the Hutt devotees. And in the blue, you will see the rate of hospitalization in the folks who are in the rebellion, who haven't joined the Empire, have not seen Jabba the Hutt, and as such are dangerous criminals who are clogging up the hospitals. Look, you can see that by these lines here on this lovely graph that Dan presented to prove you wrong once again, Phil. Can you see that? Goodness me, what an absolute criminal activity not visiting Jabba the Hutt. Because look, clearly those blue line fuckers are absolutely jamming up the hospital system, aren't they? Look, it's very, very obvious. Well, there are a couple.
The point I made to him was that I don't know about these graphs and whatever. You'll get into that, but there are some weird things where people in the first 2 weeks or so after being jabbered, they're counted as unjabbered, and then we've also got the sort of if you haven't had your booster, then you're unjabbered, and then there's so much conflicting stuff there.
All right, remind me, Phil, if you don't mind, to deal with that particular issue after I've dealt with this data set, if we've still got time, because that's a very important point, and it's a point well made, and I want to bolster that point with some actual science, Phil. Okay, but let's deal with this data set. There are several very, very serious issues with this data set. The first clue is up here, right there. See that word? Adjusted. When you see the word adjusted in a data set of this kind, what that means is not the actual observations that were made, not the actual data, not the raw data. This is a fabrication. Why do I say that? Because adjustment is a mathematical process by which we use multivariate regression to, what statisticians claim is that they use that procedure to take out the influence of a confounding variate and mean that what we're now looking at is purely down to the experimental variable. Either you visited Jabba the Hutt or you haven't. And what they've done is they've used the age of people as a covariate, because they say we know that as people age, in general, they tend to be hospitalized more. And if we want to make this data set representative of the risk to do with the Jabba the Hutting or not, then we have to take the influence of age out. Well, remember what we said earlier about correlation being unable to inform us on causality? Not now, not ever, not in any way, not at all, irrespective of the strength of correlation or anything else. It simply is not a tool that looks at causality. It looks at coincidence and nothing else. A multivariate regression is just looking at a multiple set of covariates and then ascribing causality to them inappropriately. For example, yes, it's true that people who are older tend to be hospitalized more than people who are younger. Absolutely. Is it also true, however, that people who are older tend to have been visiting Jabba the Hutt more than people who are younger? Yes. For example, to take the extreme example of that, people under a certain age have not yet been offered the opportunity and as such have not been jabbered. And everyone who is over 85 has had it rammed down their throats, literally, some of them. Okay? How do you ascribe which of those is causal and not causal, and to what degree? You cannot do it using correlation, and multivariate regression is just multiple correlation. So what we're looking at here is a fabricated data set. This is not the actual incidence. Whoops. It's a lie, in other words. It belongs in the fiction section. If you want to talk about how many people are hospitalized who have visited Jabba the Hutt versus how many people who are hospitalized who have not, then you present the raw data. Otherwise, you are presenting propaganda and fallacy. Whoops. So there's the first problem with this data set. The next thing we can see is it's broken down into different age groups. Yep, fine. And the data sets are provided, the adjusted data sets, so not the actual observations, blah-de-blah-de-blah. And the next thing that you tried to say to Dan was that, yeah, okay, well, these people who are hospitalized for COVID or for Wu flu, Kung flu, whatever you want to call it, they are just people with positive PCR results. And Dan said to you, no, that's false, that's incorrect. There's heaps of information here on exactly how they qualified as being COVID hospitalizations. These people were all hospitalized because of COVID. He said that to you, didn't he? And I wish we could show it, but we can't because of the internet situation. Well, let's look at the footnotes, shall we, Dan? Fully vaccinated population-based rates of COVID-19 associated hospitalizations among persons with a positive SARS-CoV-2 test. All right, well, let's look at the unvaccinated. Population-based rates of COVID-19 associated hospitalizations among persons with a positive SARS-CoV-2 test. That's pretty fucking clear, isn't it, Dan? You're wrong, son. These are not people hospitalized because of COVID. These are not people who have COVID. These are people who have returned a positive PCR test, which is totally incapable of determining who is and who is not meaningfully infected with a virus which may or may not cause a pathology of any kind. Those are the scientific facts on that. And as such, the data set is fucking meaningless anyway. But the problems don't end there with the data set. You can actually download the data set from the site, which I have done, funnily enough, as a scientist, of course I have. And so what I want to do now is share with you that data set to show you something just a little bit interesting, shall we say.
Yeah, while you're looking for that, Bart, there was something that he was, don't address it now when you find this thing, but there was something he was on about where, they know exactly which variant there is, Delta or Omicron or whatever. Yeah. And I was saying to him, well, nobody knows around here who's got which. Presuming there is any difference, I have no idea. But, there is not. And then he's going on about sequencing. It's all to do with sequencing, whether they find out whether it's one variant or another. And I was saying, well, suddenly they're talking about all this spread of it all over England and whatever. And nobody knows. I mean, nobody goes to the doc. You phone up the doc and you say, well, how do I know if I've got Delta? And they say, well, there is no test for that. So whether there is or not, none of the docs know it around here. So how are they putting together all these figures about it? That's the sort of thing that makes me wonder, But he was obviously very condescending. And don't you know how they test for these variants?
Yeah.
I'm not sure they do at all. They just spit into something or throw some orange juice in it if they want a week off work, And it's not the whole use of tests and muzzles and everything is nonsense. So the data is nonsense. I don't know.
Okay, what I'm going to do is respond to that, but I'm going to take my headphones out because I'm getting my own audio back. So I'll put them back in when I'm done. Right, that's better. Okay. So what is occurring in a PCR test is they're looking for bits of DNA or RNA, not a whole organism, because this thing has never been isolated as per Rivers' postulates. By the way, the people that talk about Koch's postulates, completely wrong. Koch's postulates are to do with bacteria, not viruses. The appropriate and parallel set of postulates for viral pathogens is Rivers. Okay, so get yourselves educated on that. As per Rivers, the thing has never been isolated. It's never been identified as such. What we're looking at is bits of DNA, RNA, which nobody really knows exactly what they are and exactly what they do. They have identified the bit that makes the spike protein. Okay, fine. That is not, or does not indicate that a person is infected with a whole viable functioning pathogen, i.e. a virus. It just means that there are bits of DNA in their system, likely from that organism at some point in the past. They may or may not be currently infected or infectious at all. A PCR test cannot determine whether you are infected with a disease of any kind. It says there is some protein. Also, the PCR test has a number of cycles of amplifying the signal of the various RNAs, DNAs that it's looking for in particular. And the bloke that invented it, who mysteriously suddenly died very recently after coming forward with the information which I'm about to share, funny enough, he said basically anything over about 19 cycles of amplification will lead almost certainly to a very, very high level of false positives. And all the authorities around the world thus far have been using 35 and 45 cycles. Basically, the whole thing is complete nonsense. It cannot diagnose you with any pathology. Those are the scientific facts, whether the WHO agrees with me or not. So this video may be taken down on the basis of that comment alone, because you're not allowed to disagree publicly with the WHO on this. However, those are the scientific facts. So if they're going to take this video down on that basis, well, fuck them. You know, there's nothing I can do about it. Those are still the facts, nonetheless. Yeah, so it's a totally inappropriate thing. So what we have is a pandemic of diagnoses, false diagnoses, basically. If we had a pandemic of actual meaningful disease process, then it would be reflected in the mortality statistics, and it is not. Okay, so it just doesn't even stand the most basic cursory refutation. So that's the PCR test, and in fact, the FDA in the States has quietly, without any fanfare or any large amount of media reporting, has now gone so far as to withdraw its approval for the use of the PCR test for that very reason. So, if you want to go to appeal to authority, there it is, boys and girls. Finally, the weight of people who know the science behind this going, this is fucking bullshit, has got so much that even the FDA have had to say, we need to pull this authorization. That alone renders every single statistic on anyone ever diagnosed with COVID as totally bumf right there. End of fucking discussion. Whoopsie fucking daisy. So when I was talking about not being able to see your hand in front of your face in the muddy waters, that's the kind of thing I'm talking about. Right, let me just share my screen and share this data set. The last point I want to make, then I'll put this back in so I can talk to you, and we'll sign off from there, Phil, because we're getting towards our 2-hour time slot. So these are the 12 to 17. Much more hospitalizations in the non-vaccination group. 18 to 49, same thing. 50 to 64, same thing. 65 plus, same thing. End of discussion. You're wrong, Phil. What are you talking about? Okay. And then spoke about the context, changing the excesses to 100,000. And here's what we see. In the 12 to 17s, nothing to see here. The two lines overlay each other, and your odds are 0 in either case, effectively. What about if you are a bit older, 18 to 49? Same deal. Nothing to see here. What about if you're 50 to 64? Nothing to see. Or 65 plus? Nothing to fucking see. Cool, isn't it? So, that was my point. The data set was fucking useless. You've been had by a propagandist whose only interest is in pushing his agenda. Crazy, isn't it?
It feels that way to me, but here I am, and I just sit here and look at what I see in front of my nose, really, you know, and what people who I really trust say to me. I mean, I said to him, which I think is a very good point that everybody makes. How come, you know, he'll pick on certain docs and debunk them who sell a book or something like that. And I think, well, so what? You know, I mean, sell a book, great. It's nothing wrong with that. But look at all the hundreds of thousands who are speaking out who aren't selling books. You know, and I put it to him. He says, you know, I'm sharing genocidal information or whatever by laughing at muzzles and doubting the efficacy of visiting Jabba the Hutt. Yeah. And I say, well, you know, if I'm wrong, what the hell? All I'm doing is telling people how to strengthen their immune system, strengthen their mitochondrial functioning. And yet, if you're wrong, Dan, it's catastrophic, you know? Yeah. So are you really that sure? I don't understand this absolute certainty among people who are supposed to be scientists. Surely science is always looking for how to prove itself wrong and how to move forwards.
Yep, that is your responsibility as a scientist. He failed. He's a boy in short pants. He doesn't know what he's talking about. Done.
Well, I hope he comes and chats with you. I'd love to see a live discussion between you two. I really would. We'll see what happens.
Yep.
Let's hope so.
All right.
Yeah.
All right, darling. It has been an absolute pleasure. It's been a thrill.
For me too. Yeah.
Sorry about the technical difficulties.
Somebody's asking me to play drums. Look, it's an electronic kit. It's not that great. I tell you, want to hear me play drums? Go. You know, did you hear we're actually like I think number 2 on Amazon downloads at the moment. Awesome. It was amazing, wasn't it? I mean, it shot to number 1 within a couple of days. This, if nobody knows what we're talking about, it's the We Are the 99%, the Daz Band song, which is the sort of protest anthem that's been chanted worldwide. Oh, Darren Nesbitt, who runs the Light Paper, he wrote this thing back in 2013. He's been singing it in the streets and whatever. But it's become this sort of anthem at the protests, and it's sort of we released it. We got thrown out of the studio first, actually, while we were recording it, and we went in and did that, got it done, and it shot up to like number 1 in the download charts, and it's up. It keeps getting censored, keeps getting shadow banned, as you can imagine, but. You want to hear me playing some drums? There's a bit of it on there, but there's quite a bit on YouTube here and there anyway. But
awesome.
Not going to waste time playing any drums tonight. You won't hear it properly anyway. So
no. All right. As I say, sorry about the technical difficulties. I'm having difficulty even speaking now because I'm getting my own audio back.
That's terrible when that happens. It's impossible, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So let's sign off, Phil. Thank you very much. Love you.
Thank you, mate.
You're a good man.
And
keep doing what you're doing.
Let's hope you can have a good chat with him. That would be really interesting.
Yep.
So thanks, guys, for sticking to the end, and thank you, Bart, so much for doing that. And see you soon.
Pleasure. See ya.